So here I have a file that I want to prep for either water jet cutting, laser jet cutting, or any sort of 2D cutting you can think of. Now when I take something to another program, I'm going to use the water jet for example. If I have an Omax water jet, I'm going to need to export a DXF or a DWG. That's going to be brought into the native program for that water jet and then convert it into a path. So when I do go ahead and create that DXF, I want to make sure that the only lines within that drawing are the ones that I want cut out. So for example, in this case, I have a stepped extrusion, and I also have some extra chamfers. And when I put this into a DXF, there's going to be no differentiation between the lines here on these edges and the lines that actually make up our cut profile. So whatever you put this into is going to cut along all of the lines it sees. So before we bring this into a drawing, I want to create a secondary configuration. You could always do this as a save as, but I prefer to just create a configuration that's simplified for creating that DXF. So now I have a few features I want to suppress. And for example, if I had some fillets that I was going to create later on, I'd also want to suppress those out. So I'll go ahead and suppress that, the chamfer that I have on all of those edges. And this step is created using a cut extrusion. So if I look at the feature, I can see that before that, it was all one flat plate. And the assumption here is that that step is going to get cut out later on a mill. So once again, I can go ahead and suppress this out. And so you want to suppress any features like that it won't be able to cut out, and any fillets that are in, or any fillets that aren't normal to whatever plane you're going to be working in. For example, these fillets are obviously fine because they represent part of our cut profile. So now that I have this set up, I want to bring this into a drawing. And before that, I'm going to go ahead and just take a quick look at how large the part is. So it's about 16.5 inches wide. This dimension is a little bit harder to tell, but it looks to be about 6 or 7 inches to what would be perpendicular to that opposite axis. So when you're creating a part using the water jet or laser cutter, you're going to choose some sort of size of stock and then try to fit these pieces as efficiently as possible. So we're going to go ahead and just assume that we need to cut out 2 of these. So I'm going to create a drawing from the part, and we want to create a blank DXF with just the cut lines. So we can just choose a custom sheet, which is going to remove out any sheet format. And then I'm going to go ahead and just make this a little wider than necessary. Let's say 20 inches by 16 inches. And I can always update this as needed. So I'll go ahead and add one of these in. And once again, I want to remove out any lines that I don't need, so I can remove out all those center lines. If you're going to be cutting a lot of 2D parts, you can always create a new template where you uncheck all of the detailing options so that when you bring in your view, it's not going to bring in any of those center marks. For example, in this case, I could turn off the center marks for holes in a part, and then I'm not going to have to go back in and delete them. And I could label that template something like water jet or laser cutter. Now the next thing I want to check here is that I have the right scale. We're going to want to use a scale of 1:1, and typically this will come in scaled otherwise. And if we stick to that other scale, it's going to get cut out as a half-size version of itself. So we want to make sure we have the right size. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the view and do a Control-C to copy and a Control-V to paste. So we have two of these. And then typically I'm going to want to add these in as efficiently as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate this view. Apply that change. And I'll do the same with the other. And I'm not going to worry too much about the sheet size right now, as I can update that in a second here. So if I go back into the sheet properties, I can make a quick change. And it looks like I modified the wrong dimension there. So I'm going to make this 18 wide and change this to maybe 12 inches tall and see if that works out. Getting the sheet size exactly right isn't actually that important, because when we save this out to a DXF, it's only going to look at the lines that are part of the models, and it's going to ignore this bounding area. The reason to set your sheet up like this, though, is that you'll typically be working with a size of material. For example, in this case, 18 inch by 12 inch might be the piece of aluminum or steel that we're working with. And we might also have to look out for areas where we would need to clamp down the material. For example, if we're using an Omax water jet, we'd probably have to put a clamp right around here and maybe somewhere in here as well. So this is somewhere where we might have to actually change the position of this a little bit so that we do have some material to grab onto. But once again, you'll see when I save this out, it's only going to save out the lines from the model. So I'll do a save as, and I can save this out as a DXF. And depending on what program you're working with, if you're exporting a DXF or DWG, certain programs will only accept certain standards, and the newer versions of any water jetting or laser jetting program should accept most of these. But by default, it's set to the 2000 to 2002 version. There's also some other export options, for example, changing splines to polylines. Some programs will like the polylines better and not recognize the splines well, whereas some will have no trouble importing either. That'll just come down to whatever 2D cutting program you're using. You'll have to figure out what export options work best for that program. So once again, I can just save this out quickly as a DXF. So once we do have this saved out as a DXF, typically we can open this up in AutoCAD or DraftSight. I don't have either of those installed, so I just went ahead and opened it up in eDrawings so you can see the result. And you can see it just exports out those lines from the model and nothing else. And once again, you can see that because this is flat, if we did still have that cutout, we would also see another circle here. And that would be created as part of the path when you enter that into the 2D machining program.